The Mirage 2000 spiraled through Mediterranean darkness, its navigation lights strobing erratically against star-drunk waters. Inside the cockpit, Major Lydia Cipher Korzenko fought consciousness as hydraulic fluid painted crimson warnings across her instrument panel. The Syrian air defense network had been more prepared than intelligence suggested, much more prepared. Her radio crackled with static, the encrypted channel compromised somewhere over Latakia. Blood trickled from a gash above her left eye, each drop catching the amber glow of emergency displays. The ejection seat beckoned like salvation, but 30,000 feet over hostile territory meant capture, interrogation, or worse. She'd seen the satellite photos of what remained of downed coalition pilots. Through fracturing vision, she spotted them. 4 Rafale fighters cutting elegant contrails against the moonlit Mediterranean. French aviation, call signs unknown, flying what appeared to be a routine patrol pattern along the Lebanese coast. Standard NATO frequency protocols suggested they'd monitor emergency channels, but her radio was dead, victim of the SA-11 that had nearly erased her from existence. Cipher's gloved fingers found the external beacon switch, designed for maritime search and rescue operations. The infrared strobe fired in measured pulses, invisible to ground observers but blazing like a supernova through night vision equipment. She began the sequence: short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short. SOS in Morse code, the universal distress signal every military aviator learned before their first solo flight. The Rafales continued their patrol, seemingly oblivious to her desperate transmission. Fuel gauges showed 12 minutes of powered flight remaining, maybe 15 if she could coax more from the damaged engines. Below, the Syrian coastline stretched like a jagged wound, bristling with surface-to-air missile sites that had already tasted her squadron's blood. She tried again, this time modulating the beacon with coordinates, her approximate position, bearing, and altitude. The Morse came naturally despite the chaos muscle memory from a childhood spent with her grandfather's naval radio in Vladivostok. He'd been Black Sea Fleet, before the Soviet collapse scattered his generation like autumn leaves. "Information wants to be free," he'd told her in accented English, "but first it must travel." One Rafale banked slightly, its pilot perhaps noticing an anomaly in the night sky. Cipher held her breath, watching the French fighter's trajectory shift almost imperceptibly toward her position. Had someone seen the beacon, understood the deliberate pattern of her distress signal, or was she hallucinating hope in the final moments before Syrian fighters scrambled to finish what their missiles had started? The Mediterranean stretched endlessly below, indifferent to the small human drama playing out in its airspace. Time compressed to heartbeats and fuel consumption rates, while Cipher waited to learn whether she would live to see another dawn. Major Lydia Korzenko had earned her call sign Cipher, not through cryptographic expertise, but because of her uncanny ability to decode complex tactical situations that left other pilots confused. Squadron mates joked she could read enemy intentions like hieroglyphs, turning chaos into comprehensible patterns. Tonight, that reputation felt like bitter irony as she struggled to communicate her predicament to potential rescuers. The damaged Mirage shuddered through another altitude loss, forcing her to trade precious feet for airspeed. Syrian radar installations dotted the coastline like malevolent lighthouses, their rotating dishes sweeping methodically across international airspace. She'd been part of a 4-ship formation, targeting a chemical weapons facility outside Damascus, when the integrated air defense system had sprung its trap with devastating precision. Her wingman, Captain Torres, had died instantly when an SA-17 detonated against his port wing. The explosion vaporized half the aircraft in a microsecond bloom of superheated metal and jet fuel. She'd watched his call sign disappear from her tactical display like extinguished starlight, another name for the memorial wall at Incirlik Air Base. The remaining 2 Mirages had scattered according to protocol, following separate egress routes toward the safety of international waters. But surface-to-air missiles don't respect boundaries drawn on charts. The second SA-11 had tracked her through 3 separate evasive maneuvers before proximity fusing turned night into temporary day 30 meters off her starboard wing. Shrapnel had perforated her right engine, severed hydraulic lines, and spiderwebbed the canopy with stress fractures that leaked precious cabin pressure into the thin air. The aircraft's fly-by-wire system fought valiantly to maintain controlled flight, but physics remained unforgiving. Every minute aloft brought her closer to unrecoverable flight parameters. The lead Rafale pilot finally responded to her beacon, banking hard left to investigate the infrared anomaly. Through her night vision goggles, she could see his aircraft's sleek profile silhouetted against the star field, twin vertical stabilizers, canard four-wing configuration, the distinctive shark-like fuselage that marked French aerospace engineering. Dassault Rafale F-3, probably carrying Mica air-to-air missiles and targeting pods for precision strike missions. She switched her beacon to a new sequence, transmitting her actual coordinates in military grid reference format. The numbers came slowly, each digit requiring deliberate concentration as shock and blood loss clouded her judgment. But Morse code transcended language barriers, a universal mathematical poetry that connected aviators across national boundaries and political differences. The Rafale pilot must have understood because his formation suddenly altered course, abandoning their coastal patrol to converge on her position with purpose that suggested recognition rather than curiosity. Squadron leader Anton Ghost Dubois had logged 8,000 hours in various fighter aircraft, from the elderly Jaguar to the sophisticated Rafale, currently responding to his touch like a mechanical extension of human will. 22 years of military aviation had taught him to recognize anomalies in the night sky, subtle variations in light and shadow that suggested human presence rather than natural phenomena. The infrared beacon flickered below his patrol altitude with mathematical precision that ruled out equipment malfunction or space debris. Someone was deliberately transmitting a coded message, and the pattern suggested distress rather than deception. Ghost's wingman, Captain Marie Blanchard, had already begun scanning emergency frequencies for corresponding radio traffic, but the electromagnetic spectrum remained silent except for routine commercial aviation chatter. Falcon lead to Falcon 2, Ghost transmitted on their secure channel. Confirm visual contact with infrared source bearing 095 degrees, distance approximately 12 kilometers. Falcon 2 confirms contact, Blanchard replied. Her voice carried the calm professionalism that had earned her a place in the Armée de l'Air's elite escadron de reconnaissance, despite institutional skepticism about female combat pilots. Source appears to be aircraft-mounted emergency beacon, transmitting in Morse code. Ghost pushed his throttles forward, feeling the Rafale's twin M88 engines respond with barely restrained violence. The aircraft accelerated smoothly through Mach 0.85, its fly-by-wire computers automatically adjusting control surfaces to maintain optimal performance. Below, the Mediterranean reflected scattered moonlight like hammered pewter, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human suffering. The Morse pattern resolved into clarity as they approached, SOS followed by grid coordinates that placed the transmitter somewhere over international waters east of Cyprus. But visual acquisition revealed a more complex situation than simple navigation emergency. The unknown aircraft was losing altitude steadily, its flight path suggesting severe mechanical damage rather than routine equipment failure. Falcon lead, this is Falcon 4, came a new voice over the radio. Lieutenant Commander Pascal Morrow flew the formation's reconnaissance variant, equipped with advanced sensors and communication systems that could penetrate most electronic countermeasures. I'm showing a Mirage 2000 configuration, single seat, significant infrared signature suggesting engine damage or fire. Ghost felt his pulse quicken. Mirage 2000 meant coalition forces, possibly French, certainly Allied. The aircraft type suggested either UAE, Greek, or indigenous French air forces, though operational security prevented positive identification without visual confirmation or radio contact. Whoever was flying that damaged fighter had probably been supporting Operation Inherent Resolve against Islamic State targets in Syria or Iraq. The political implications crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. If the pilot was Syrian or Russian, rendering assistance might constitute an act of war under current rules of engagement. But if the aircraft belonged to NATO or Partnership for Peace Forces, abandoning a fellow aviator violated every principle of military brotherhood that bound democratic air forces together. Falcon formation, maintain current heading, Ghost commanded, accepting responsibility for whatever consequences might follow. Descend to flight level 200 and prepare for possible search and rescue coordination. The damaged Mirage continued its steady descent toward unforgiving waters, its pilot's fate now intertwined with 4 French aviators who had accidentally become witnesses to a drama that transcended national boundaries. In the cockpit of her failing aircraft, Cypher watched their approach with growing hope tempered by brutal realism about her chances of survival. Captain Marie Blanchard had never expected to encounter a real emergency during what should have been a routine Mediterranean patrol. Her Rafale, designated Falcon 2, carried external fuel tanks instead of weapons, configured for extended reconnaissance missions along the Lebanese coast, where French peacekeepers maintained their precarious watch over one of the world's most volatile regions. Through her multifunction displays, she monitored the approaching aircraft with professional detachment that masked deeper emotional currents. The damaged Mirage reminded her of her own close call over Afghanistan 3 years earlier, when Taliban surface-to-air missiles had transformed a simple close air support mission into a desperate fight for survival above Helmand Province. Falcon 2 to lead, she transmitted. I'm getting intermittent transponder returns from the target aircraft. Squawking emergency code 7700, but the signal strength suggests damaged equipment. Ghost's reply carried tension that his voice training couldn't entirely suppress. Copy, Falcon 2. Can you determine nationality or unit identification? Blanchard activated her reconnaissance pod's telephoto cameras, zooming in on the struggling fighter as it descended through 22,000 feet. The Mirage's camouflage pattern appeared familiar, gray and blue tones consistent with French or UAE Air Force schemes. But battle damage obscured national insignia, leaving her to guess at political implications that could escalate into international incidents. The unknown pilot was still transmitting coordinates in Morse, now adding what appeared to be fuel status and mechanical condition codes. Whoever occupied that cockpit possessed exceptional situational awareness despite obvious physical distress. The beacon pattern suggested someone with extensive training in survival communications, probably a career military aviator rather than conscript or militia pilot. Lead, this is 2, Blanchard continued. The pilot is transmitting fuel state approximately 8 minutes. Single engine failure confirmed. Hydraulic systems compromised. Request permission to attempt radio contact on guard frequency. Negative on radio transmission, Ghost replied. Maintain electronic silence until we determine nationality and rules of engagement status. The response frustrated Blanchard, though she understood the reasoning. Syrian and Russian electronic warfare systems monitored all radio frequencies throughout the eastern Mediterranean, recording conversations and building intelligence profiles on coalition air operations. A single unguarded transmission could compromise operational security for dozens of ongoing missions. But watching another aviator die from bureaucratic caution violated everything she'd learned about military brotherhood during her years in combat zones. The Mirage pilot was fighting desperately to maintain controlled flight, evident from the aircraft's increasingly erratic flight path and growing infrared signature that suggested catastrophic engine damage. Her grandfather had flown Spitfires during the Battle of Britain, engaging Luftwaffe bombers over London when national survival trumped political niceties. He told her stories about German and British pilots who'd saluted each other after aerial combat, recognizing shared humanity that transcended temporary political divisions. Professional respect among aviators crossed enemy lines because flying required courage that unified human beings regardless of uniform color. The damaged Mirage executed another altitude-trading turn, its pilot probably conserving precious fuel while seeking optimal glide ratio toward some imaginary landing site. But the Mediterranean offered no emergency airfields, no gentle beaches suitable for deadstick approaches. 20,000 feet below stretched only dark water and crushing depths that had swallowed countless aircraft since humans first dared challenge gravity. Blanchard made her decision with characteristic directness that had once prompted a superior officer to describe her as magnificently insubordinate. She switched her radio to international emergency frequency and keyed the microphone, accepting whatever consequences might follow her breach of operational protocol. The transmission that crackled across international emergency frequency carried a distinctly feminine voice speaking accented English that suggested Eastern European origins, Russian or Ukrainian, possibly Polish or Czech. But the call sign identified coalition forces, resolving Ghost's primary concern about rules of engagement while creating new complications about operational security. Any station, this is Sabre 01 declaring emergency. Position 34 degrees, 52 minutes north, 34 degrees, 18 minutes east. Fuel state critical, single engine failure, requesting immediate assistance. Ghost felt relief and apprehension compete for psychological dominance. Coalition call sign meant rendering assistance was legally permissible under current rules of engagement, but the pilot's accent suggested complicated political dynamics that could embarrass French foreign policy if mishandled. Eastern European aviators flying for Western air forces often carried baggage from previous conflicts that made their presence diplomatically sensitive. Falcon 2, did you copy that transmission? Ghost asked unnecessarily, knowing Blanchard had monitored the same frequency. Copy lead. Female pilot, Eastern European accent, definitely coalition call sign format. Recommend we render assistance per standing orders regarding Allied personnel in distress. The recommendation aligned with Ghost's instincts while acknowledging political realities that governed modern air operations. France maintained complex relationships throughout the former Soviet Union, balancing energy imports from Russia against NATO solidarity with Eastern European partners who'd suffered under communist occupation. A female pilot with Slavic accent flying coalition missions represented someone's daughter or sister, regardless of geopolitical complications. Sabre 01, this is Falcon lead, French Air Force Patrol responding to your distress call. State your fuel endurance and preferred recovery option. The reply came immediately, suggesting the pilot had been monitoring emergency frequency hopping for exactly this contact. Falcon lead, Sabre 01. Fuel endurance approximately 6 minutes, aircraft severely damaged by surface-to-air missile engagement over Syria. Request escort to nearest suitable recovery airfield. Ghost consulted his navigation display, calculating distances to various airports capable of handling emergency landings. Cyprus offered the closest runways, but Turkish-controlled northern sectors created political complications for coalition aircraft. Israeli airspace remained technically available, but required diplomatic coordination that could consume precious time. Lebanon's airports existed in name only, controlled by Hezbollah militia with surface-to-air capabilities that made approach trajectories suicidal. Sabre 01, nearest suitable field is Akrotiri, Cyprus, bearing 270 degrees, distance 112 nautical miles. Current winds favor runway 28 approach. Can you maintain controlled flight for approximately 15 minutes? The pause before response suggested the pilot was calculating fuel consumption rates against distance requirements, performing mental arithmetic that would determine whether she lived or died. Combat aviation reduced human existence to mathematical equations balanced on razor edges of physics and probability. Falcon lead, negative on 15-minute endurance, fuel exhaustion in 4 to 5 minutes maximum, requesting emergency procedures for Mediterranean water landing. The transmission carried resignation that Ghost recognized from his own brushes with mortality during deployments over Afghanistan and Libya. Professional aviators learned to accept death as an occupational hazard, but hearing someone prepare for deliberate water impact triggered protective instincts that transcended national boundaries. Major Lydia Korzhenko had survived enough emergencies to recognize when mathematics trumped optimism. Her remaining engine showed oil pressure fluctuations that suggested bearing failure within minutes, not hours. The Mediterranean stretched below like an infinite grave, its surface deceptively calm from altitude, but actually composed of waves that would shatter her aircraft like glass against granite. She'd practiced water survival procedures countless times during her training years in Ukraine, then later during NATO integration courses that prepared Warsaw Pact aviators for Western operational standards. Cold water immersion, life raft deployment, emergency beacon activation, all theoretical exercises that assumed rescue forces would arrive before hypothermia or drowning could claim their victim. But theory diverged from reality when practiced alone at night over hostile waters, while wearing 70 pounds of survival equipment that could become anchors dragging her toward the seabed. Even perfect execution of emergency procedures offered perhaps 30% survival probability, optimistic calculations that assumed calm seas and rapid rescue response. Falcon lead, Sabre 01 beginning emergency shutdown procedures. Engine failure imminent, preparing for controlled water impact approximately grid square 3452. Her voice remained steady despite circumstances that justified panic. Years of combat operations had taught her to compartmentalize fear, storing emotional responses for later processing, while focusing on immediate survival requirements. The Mirage responded sluggishly to control inputs as airspeed decreased below optimal flying parameters, but she could still influence impact angle and velocity to maximize survivability. Ghost's formation had closed to visual distance, the 4 Rafales flying escort positions that provided psychological comfort despite their inability to prevent her inevitable crash. French pilots maintained professional bearing that reminded her of multinational exercises, where aviators from different countries discovered their shared commitment to excellence transcended political boundaries. Sabre 01, Falcon lead copies emergency procedures, will maintain visual contact and coordinate rescue operations with appropriate agencies. Surface winds appear minimal, sea state calm. You have good conditions for water survival. The encouragement felt genuine rather than merely procedural, suggesting Ghost understood the human dimension of her predicament rather than simply following emergency response protocols. She appreciated his professionalism while recognizing that rescue coordination would require hours she probably didn't possess once immersed in October Mediterranean waters. Her grandfather's voice echoed across decades of memory, speaking words he'd shared during her childhood visits to his apartment overlooking Sevastopol Harbor. Little Lydia, the sea respects preparation and punishes carelessness, but it occasionally rewards courage with mercy. He'd been describing 19th-century naval battles, but the wisdom applied equally to 21st-century aviation emergencies. She tightened her survival vest, checked her emergency beacon one final time, and began the controlled descent that would either kill her quickly or begin a desperate struggle for survival in waters that had claimed countless vessels throughout human history. Above, 4 French pilots she'd never met prepared to witness her potential death, their presence transforming solitary catastrophe into shared human experience. The engine finally seized with mechanical finality that eliminated remaining choices. Silence replaced the familiar turbine whine that had accompanied her through hundreds of combat missions, leaving only wind noise and the whisper of control surfaces responding to her desperate inputs. Lieutenant Commander Pascal Morrow activated every sensor available to his reconnaissance-configured Rafale, recording the unfolding emergency with systems designed to document battlefield activities for post-mission analysis. His telephoto cameras captured the disabled Mirage's final moments of powered flight, while thermal sensors tracked decreasing engine temperatures that confirmed catastrophic mechanical failure. But technology couldn't record the emotional impact of watching a fellow aviator prepare for almost certain death over dark Mediterranean waters. Morrow had witnessed aircraft losses during combat deployments, but always at distances that reduced human tragedy to tactical data points on mission reports. Tonight's emergency unfolded close enough to see individual details that transformed abstract casualty statistics into visceral personal experience. "Falcon 4 to lead," he transmitted. "I'm documenting this incident for search and rescue coordination. The pilot appears to be following proper emergency procedures, maintaining optimal glide angle for water impact." Ghost's reply carried tension that revealed his own emotional investment in the stranger's survival. "Copy, Falcon 4. Ensure your recordings include precise impact coordinates and timestamps for rescue team reference." The damaged Mirage descended through 8,000 feet with surprising grace considering its battle damage and single-engine configuration. Its pilot was clearly experienced, maximizing glide performance while positioning the aircraft for survivable water impact, rather than panicking into uncontrolled flight that would guarantee death. Professional competence under extreme stress suggested military rather than civilian aviation background. Morrow's communication systems automatically recorded the emergency frequency dialogue, preserving every transmission for intelligence analysis that might reveal tactical information about Syrian air defense capabilities. But his personal interest transcended operational requirements, focused on the human drama playing out below his aircraft's sleek nose. The pilot's accent intrigued him. Eastern European origins were obvious, but her precise English suggested extensive Western training rather than hurried NATO integration courses that characterized many former Warsaw Pact aviators. Someone had invested significant resources in her education, making tonight's loss particularly tragic from institutional as well as personal perspectives. His grandfather had fought in the French resistance during World War II, parachuting behind German lines to coordinate partisan activities that harassed Nazi occupation forces. Family stories described the international character of resistance movements, where Polish officers worked alongside French commandos and Soviet agents to defeat common enemies. Political differences meant nothing when facing shared threats to human dignity and freedom. Tonight's emergency reminded him of those wartime narratives. National boundaries became irrelevant when aircraft accidents reduced political affiliations to irrelevant abstractions. The pilot fighting for survival below his aircraft was someone's daughter, sister, possibly mother. Human relationships that transcended temporary geopolitical divisions between nations that shared common democratic values. "Sabre 01, this is Falcon 4, Morrow transmitted, abandoning protocol to offer personal encouragement. "I'm monitoring your descent profile. You're maintaining excellent airspeed control and impact angle. You've got this." The reply came immediately, suggesting the pilot appreciated emotional support as much as technical information. "Falcon 4, Sabre 01, thank you for staying with me. It's good not to be alone out here." Her words carried vulnerability that military aviation rarely acknowledged publicly. Combat pilots were trained to project invulnerability, suppressing fear and doubt to maintain unit morale during dangerous operations. But facing probable death alone over dark water stripped away professional facades, revealing shared humanity that connected aviators across cultural and linguistic barriers. Mara watched the Mirage continue its controlled descent, knowing he was witnessing either remarkable survival or tragic death, possibly both. The final minutes before water impact acquired surreal quality that transformed routine emergency procedures into profound meditation on mortality and human resilience. Cypher completed her pre-impact checklist with mechanical precision, while contemplating the strange trajectory that had brought her to this moment 30 miles east of Cyprus. Surrounded by French pilots she'd never met, but who'd become reluctant witnesses to her struggle. Her path to military aviation had begun in Kiev during the chaotic years following Soviet collapse, when Ukraine's newly independent Air Force desperately needed pilots willing to master Western aircraft and tactics. She'd volunteered partly from patriotic duty, but mainly because flying represented freedom from the economic uncertainty that plagued her generation throughout Eastern Europe during the 1990s. NATO integration had required learning English, French, and German well enough to coordinate complex multinational operations. She'd spent 2 years at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, training alongside American, Canadian, and British pilots who initially viewed Eastern Europeans with suspicion rooted in Cold War stereotypes. Proving her competence had required exceeding rather than matching their performance standards. Sabre-01, impact in approximately 90 seconds, she transmitted, updating Ghost's formation on her deteriorating situation. I want to thank you for providing escort. It means more than you know. Copy Sabre-01. Rescue coordination is underway. French Navy assets are moving to your projected impact area. Stay strong, we're going to get you home. Ghost's promise felt genuine despite his inability to influence the physical realities of her situation. Home meant different things to different people. For her, it represented a small apartment in Lviv, where her sister waited for postcards from various deployment locations. Alina worried constantly about her dangerous profession, but supported her sister's choices because flying paid well enough to support their widowed mother's medical expenses. The Mediterranean surface resolved into individual wave patterns as her altitude decreased through 2,000 feet. Water that appeared smooth from cruise altitude actually showed significant swell action that would complicate survival procedures, but conditions remained within acceptable parameters for emergency water landing if she could maintain proper approach angle and airspeed. Her survival vest contained enough emergency supplies for perhaps 48 hours in moderate sea conditions: water purification tablets, energy bars, signaling devices, and a small radio beacon that would transmit location data to rescue forces. But October Mediterranean water temperatures hovered around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia within hours even with proper survival equipment. She'd practiced cold water survival during NATO training exercises in the North Sea, learning to control breathing, conserve body heat, and maintain consciousness, while floating in conditions that killed unprepared personnel within minutes. The knowledge provided confidence without eliminating genuine fear about her chances of surviving until rescue forces could reach her location. 1,000 feet, she announced over emergency frequency, continuing her descent toward appointment with the ancient sea that had witnessed countless human tragedies throughout recorded history. Above, 4 French fighters maintained formation like mechanical angels, their presence transforming solitary catastrophe into shared human experience that honored military brotherhood transcending national boundaries. The impact came with violence that exceeded her training scenarios, but remained within survivable parameters thanks to her careful preparation and favorable sea conditions. The Mirage struck Mediterranean swells at precisely calculated angle and airspeed, its fuselage absorbing tremendous kinetic energy, while protecting her from immediate death through crushing deceleration forces that would have liquefied unprotected human anatomy. Cypher's consciousness flickered during the impact sequence, stress and deceleration combining to overwhelm her nervous system's capacity for processing simultaneous trauma. But her training overrode temporary disorientation, muscle memory executing emergency egress procedures without requiring conscious decision-making that might have been compromised by shock and confusion. The cockpit canopy had shattered during impact, eliminating the need for explosive jettison systems that might have malfunctioned due to water immersion. Cold Mediterranean water flooded her seat immediately, shocking her system into hyper-alert consciousness as survival instincts engaged with primal intensity that transcended military training. She released her harness and pushed clear of the sinking aircraft, feeling the Mirage's mass pulling her downward as its engine intakes filled with seawater. The fighter disappeared beneath dark swells within 30 seconds, leaving only scattered debris and aviation fuel to mark where $20 million of sophisticated military hardware had ceased to exist. Her survival vest inflated automatically upon water contact, providing buoyancy that allowed her to float without constant swimming that would have exhausted her energy reserves within hours. The integrated beacon activated simultaneously, transmitting location data to satellite systems that would guide rescue forces to her position. Falcon lead, Sabre 01 is in the water, she transmitted through her survival radio, confirming successful ejection to the circling French pilots who'd maintained overwatch throughout her ordeal. Aircraft destroyed, pilot conscious and mobile, emergency beacon active. Ghost's reply carried obvious relief mixed with continued concern about her prospects for survival in conditions that remained dangerous despite her successful escape from the sinking aircraft. Copy, Sabre 01. Outstanding job on the water landing. French Navy rescue units are en route, estimated arrival time approximately 2 hours. Can you maintain current position? 2 hours felt like geological time periods when measured against October Mediterranean water temperatures and her body's capacity for retaining heat through wet survival equipment. But her training had prepared her for exactly these conditions, teaching techniques for conserving energy and body heat while awaiting rescue in hostile environments. She activated her secondary beacon and began the mental discipline required for extended survival, focusing on immediate priorities, maintaining airway clearance, conserving body heat, monitoring her physical condition for signs of hypothermia or shock that could compromise decision-making capacity when rescue forces finally arrived. Above, the French formation maintained protective overwatch, their presence providing psychological comfort that reduced the sense of isolation that might have contributed to panic or despair. Ghost coordinated with rescue forces while his wingmen documented her location and condition, ensuring accurate navigation data for recovery operations. The sea accepted her presence with indifferent tolerance, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply existing as it had for millions of years before humans had learned to challenge gravity through mechanical flight. Captain Marie Blanchard monitored the survival radio frequency with intensity that surprised her with its emotional investment in a stranger's fate. Her Rafale circled the crash site at 500 feet, low enough to maintain visual contact with the tiny figure floating among dark swells, but high enough to avoid salt spray that could damage her aircraft's sensitive electronics. The pilot, Sabre 01, remained conscious and responsive to radio calls, professional competence intact despite physical trauma that would have incapacitated less experienced personnel. Her survival training was obviously excellent, evident from her calm demeanor and proper execution of emergency procedures that maximized her chances of rescue before hypothermia or dehydration could claim her life. Falcon lead, this is 2, Blanchard transmitted. The survivor appears alert and maintaining proper floating position. I can see her emergency beacon strobing approximately every 3 seconds. No signs of immediate distress. Ghost acknowledged her report while coordinating with French Navy vessels, steaming toward their position from bases in Cyprus and southern France. Rescue operations required careful choreography between air and surface units, timing arrivals to minimize exposure time for survivors while avoiding conflicts between different agencies responding to the same emergency. Blanchard had never participated in actual combat search and rescue operations, though she trained extensively in scenarios that prepared aircrew for supporting downed pilots in hostile territory. Tonight's mission demonstrated how quickly routine patrol flights could evolve into life-or-death situations that tested every aspect of military aviation training. Her personal interest in the survivors' welfare extended beyond professional duty. Female military pilots remained rare enough that they formed informal international networks, sharing experiences and supporting each other through challenges that male colleagues rarely encountered. Gender discrimination had decreased significantly during recent decades, but women still faced skepticism that required constant proof of competence their male peers took for granted. The survivors' accents suggested Eastern European origins, probably Ukrainian or Polish based on linguistic patterns Blanchard had learned to recognize during NATO integration exercises involving former Warsaw Pact air forces. These pilots often possessed exceptional skills developed through rigorous Soviet-era training programs that emphasized technical proficiency over political reliability. Sabre 01, this is Falcon 2, she transmitted on survival frequency. I'm maintaining visual contact from above. You're doing everything right down there. Rescue forces are closing on your position. Falcon 2, thank you for staying with me. The water's getting pretty cold, but I'm managing okay. How long until the cavalry arrives? The survivor's voice carried controlled tension that revealed her genuine concern about deteriorating conditions, while maintaining professional composure that impressed Blanchard with its discipline. Hypothermia was probably beginning to affect peripheral circulation, making fine motor control increasingly difficult as core body temperature decreased. Sabre 01, current estimate is 90 minutes until surface rescue arrives. Can you maintain your current condition for that duration? The pause before response suggested the pilot was honestly assessing her physical capabilities rather than providing optimistic estimates that might compromise rescue planning. Falcon 2, I think so. My survival suit is working properly and I've got emergency rations. Biggest concern is staying awake. The cold makes you want to sleep. Blanchard understood the reference. Cold water immersion induced drowsiness that could prove fatal if survivors lost consciousness before rescue arrived. Maintaining alertness required constant mental stimulation, often provided through radio conversations with circling aircraft that kept crash victims engaged with external reality rather than retreating into hypothermic confusion. The French formation would maintain station until surface rescue units arrived, providing communication relay and precise navigation guidance that could mean the difference between successful recovery and another name added to military memorial walls. Squadron leader Ghost calculated fuel consumption rates against rescue timeline estimates, determining whether his formation could maintain protective overwatch until French Navy units reached the crash site. His Rafale carried external tanks that provided extended loiter capability, but the other 3 aircraft were configured for standard patrol missions with limited endurance over distant ocean areas. Falcon formation, this is lead. Current fuel states and estimated time on station. His pilots responded with precise calculations that demonstrated their professionalism, while revealing the mathematical constraints governing their ability to protect the downed aviator. Falcon 2 reported 40 minutes remaining loiter time. Falcon 3 estimated 35 minutes. Falcon 4 confirmed 50 minutes due to his reconnaissance configuration's fuel efficiency optimization. The timeline created tactical dilemmas that required balancing survivor protection against operational commitments to other missions that might require French air assets. Ghost's formation was officially assigned to routine Mediterranean patrol duties, but emergency situations justified temporary mission changes that could be explained through proper channels after successful rescue operations. Falcon Lead, this is Saber 01. I don't want you guys burning up all your fuel on my account. I can handle myself down here for a while if necessary. Her consideration for their operational limitations impressed Ghost with its unselfishness, despite her precarious situation. Most survivors focused exclusively on their own circumstances, unable to comprehend the broader tactical picture that governed rescue coordination between multiple agencies and aircraft. Negative Saber 01. We're staying until relief forces arrive. That's not negotiable. Ghost's reply reflected command decisions that prioritized human life over bureaucratic convenience, accepting responsibility for fuel expenditures that would require justification through administrative channels. Military aviation operated under regulations that sometimes conflicted with ethical imperatives, forcing commanders to choose between technical compliance and moral obligations. The survivor's nationality remained unclear, though her call sign suggested coalition forces rather than neutral or hostile aircraft. Eastern European accent implied either NATO partner nations or recent alliance members whose political relationships with Russia complicated their integration into Western military structures. But specific identification mattered less than her status as military aviator facing mortal danger through circumstances beyond her control. His grandfather had served in the French resistance during World War II, coordinating escape networks that helped Allied aircrew evade German capture after being shot down over occupied territory. Family stories emphasize the international character of resistance activities, where nationality became secondary to shared commitment to defeating totalitarian forces that threatened democratic civilization. Tonight's rescue operation embodied similar principles. The pilot floating in Mediterranean swells represented someone who'd been conducting legitimate military operations against enemies of democratic values, Islamic State terrorists who used chemical weapons against civilian populations and committed genocide against religious minorities throughout Iraq and Syria. Falcon formation, extend loiter time as required, Ghost commanded. We'll coordinate fuel management with tanker assets if necessary. Nobody goes home until our survivor is safe. The decision reflected institutional values that placed human dignity above administrative convenience, accepting operational costs that civilian bureaucrats might question but military personnel understood instinctively. Aviation had always been dangerous. Rescue operations honored shared risks that bound aircrew together across national boundaries. The Mediterranean maintained its ancient indifference to human concerns, while modern military technology converged on coordinates where one woman fought against odds that would have defeated less prepared personnel. Above, French fighters provided electronic shepherding that transformed potential tragedy into testament to international military cooperation. Major Lydia Korzenko felt consciousness beginning to fluctuate as hypothermia progressed through initial stages that preceded complete circulatory collapse. Her survival training had prepared her for these symptoms: decreased fine motor control, mild confusion, slight speech slurring that indicated core body temperature dropping toward dangerous levels that required immediate medical intervention. The survival suit was performing within specifications, but October Mediterranean water conducted heat away from her body faster than metabolic processes could replace it. She'd consumed one energy bar and sipped water from her emergency supply, maintaining blood sugar levels that supported continued alertness despite increasingly difficult environmental conditions. Falcon 2, Sabre 01. I'm starting to feel pretty drowsy down here. Can you keep talking to me? It helps maintain focus. Blanchard's reply came immediately, recognition that conversation provided psychological anchoring that could prevent hypothermic confusion from compromising survival decisions. Copy, Sabre 01. Let's chat about something other than current circumstances. Where are you from originally? The question sparked memories that provided welcome distraction from physical discomfort and growing fatigue. Western Ukraine, city called Lviv. My grandfather was Black Sea Fleet, taught me to love aviation when I was little. What about you? Normandy coast, near Caen. My father flew Jaguars during the Gulf War. Family tradition, I suppose. Blanchard's voice carried warmth that transcended radio static and international boundaries, establishing human connection that made survival feel achievable rather than merely theoretical. Cypher appreciated the personal disclosure, understanding that military aviators rarely shared family information during operational communications. But emergency situations created exceptions to normal security protocols, allowing genuine human interaction that supported psychological endurance during extreme circumstances. Your call sign is Cypher, right? How did you earn that one? The nickname brought back memories of squadron camaraderie that felt distant from her current predicament floating among dark Mediterranean swells. I'm good at reading enemy tactical patterns, figuring out what they're planning before they execute. My commander said I could decode chaos like it was written in plain language. Impressive skill set. We could use someone like that in our squadron. Blanchard's comment carried implications about potential future collaboration that assumed successful rescue rather than accepting defeat as inevitable outcome. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics that ranged from childhood experiences to professional achievements that had shaped their respective careers. Cypher found herself genuinely enjoying the discussion despite circumstances that should have precluded casual social interaction. Her hypothermia symptoms were progressing steadily, but remained within manageable parameters as long as rescue forces arrived within projected timeframes. The survival suit's thermal protection was performing adequately, though she could feel core body temperature decreasing in ways that would eventually compromise cognitive function if exposure continued much longer. Falcon 2, I can see lights on the horizon. Is that our rescue party? Blanchard consulted her tactical display, confirming the approach of French Navy assets that had been steaming toward their position since the initial distress call. Affirmative, Sabre 01. French frigate Auvergne with rescue helicopter support, estimated arrival at your position in 15 minutes. The news provided psychological lift that helped counter growing physical fatigue and mental confusion associated with prolonged cold water immersion. 15 minutes represented achievable duration for maintaining consciousness and cooperation with rescue personnel, who would need her assistance to complete successful recovery operations. Above, the French formation prepared to coordinate with surface rescue units, ensuring smooth transition between airborne overwatch and naval recovery operations that would hopefully conclude with her safe return to medical facilities, equipped to treat hypothermia and possible internal injuries from the water impact. The ancient Mediterranean had accepted countless human offerings throughout history, but tonight it would surrender at least one back to the community of aviators who challenged gravity as their profession and calling. Her grandfather's voice echoed across decades, reminding her that the sea occasionally rewarded courage with mercy, though it always demanded respect for its power to claim human lives with casual indifference. 20 minutes later, strong hands pulled her from water that had nearly claimed another victim, lifting her toward French Navy helicopter that represented salvation, earned through preparation, training, and the brotherhood of aviators who refused to abandon their own regardless of nationality or political affiliation. The rescue helicopter's crew chief, Petty Officer Francois Durand, had participated in dozens of maritime rescue operations throughout his 12-year naval career, but few had involved military personnel in active war zones, where political complications could transform routine humanitarian missions into international incidents requiring diplomatic coordination at the highest levels. The survivor, call sign Cypher according to radio traffic, appeared alert and responsive despite obvious hypothermia symptoms that required immediate medical attention. Her English was excellent, though accented in ways that suggested Eastern European origins consistent with intelligence briefings about multinational coalition air operations over Syria and Iraq. "How are you feeling, Major?" Durand asked as his medical team began warming procedures designed to gradually raise core body temperature without shocking cardiovascular systems weakened by prolonged cold exposure. The helicopter's cabin was equipped with advanced life support equipment that could stabilize serious trauma patients during transit to definitive medical care. "Better now that I'm out of the water," Cypher replied, her voice steady despite visible shivering that indicated her body's attempt to generate heat through involuntary muscle contractions. "Thank you for pulling me out of there. I wasn't sure I'd make it another 30 minutes. Her honesty about physical limitations impressed Durand with its lack of false bravado that sometimes characterized military personnel reluctant to admit vulnerability, even when facing life-threatening circumstances. Professional aviators learn to assess their capabilities realistically because overconfidence in aviation usually resulted in death rather than mere embarrassment. The medical team wrapped her in thermal blankets while monitoring vital signs that would determine whether immediate evacuation to hospital facilities was necessary, or if she could be treated aboard the frigate Auvergne during transit to port. Her pulse rate remained elevated but stable, blood pressure showed normal parameters, and oxygen saturation levels indicated no respiratory complications from seawater inhalation. "Major, I need to ask some questions for our incident report," Durand continued, balancing medical priorities against intelligence requirements that governed military rescue operations. "Can you tell me your unit designation and the nature of your mission when you were shot down?" Cypher's pause before responding suggested careful consideration of operational security requirements that prevented disclosure of classified information even during emergency situations. Coalition air operations maintained strict protocols about mission details that could compromise ongoing activities if captured by hostile forces or leaked through intelligence networks. "I can confirm coalition forces conducting legitimate military operations against Islamic State targets in Syria. Aircraft was damaged by Syrian air defense systems during egress from target area. I can provide more detailed briefing to appropriate intelligence personnel after medical evaluation." Her response demonstrated proper understanding of security protocols while providing sufficient information for rescue documentation, without compromising operational details that might affect other missions. Durand appreciated her professionalism despite physical distress that would have justified less careful attention to classification requirements. The helicopter turned toward the French frigate Auvergne, whose medical facilities could provide more comprehensive treatment for hypothermia and possible internal injuries that might not become apparent until hours after the water impact. Naval vessels carried sophisticated medical equipment and personnel trained to handle trauma cases that exceeded basic first aid capabilities. Above, the Rafale formation maintained protective overwatch, ensuring air security during vulnerable rescue operations that could be targeted by hostile forces aware of coalition pilot recovery in international waters. Ghost's pilots monitored threat frequencies while providing navigation assistance that guided the helicopter toward its destination with precision that minimized exposure time. Major, your French escort is requesting permission to break station and return to base. Are you comfortable releasing them from protective duties? Cypher understood the fuel constraints that governed tactical aviation, knowing the Rafale pilots had already exceeded normal mission parameters to ensure her survival. Their dedication represented military brotherhood that transcended national boundaries and political differences between democratic nations. Please thank them for saving my life. Their presence made all the difference during some very dark moments out there. The sincere gratitude in her voice reflected genuine appreciation for risks the French pilots had accepted by remaining on station beyond normal operational limits. Military aviation created bonds between aircrew that civilian observers rarely comprehended, forged through shared dangers that made nationality secondary to professional competence and personal courage. As the rescue helicopter approached the frigate Auvergne, Cypher reflected on the strange sequence of events that had transformed routine combat mission into international rescue operation involving personnel she'd never met but who'd risked their own safety to ensure her survival. The Mediterranean night that had nearly claimed her life had instead demonstrated the enduring power of human solidarity in circumstances where political divisions became irrelevant compared to immediate moral obligations. The frigate Auvergne's medical officer, Lieutenant Commander Dr. Sarah Morrow, had treated numerous casualties during French military operations throughout Africa and the Middle East, but few cases had involved aircrew from other nations, whose medical records and treatment protocols might differ significantly from French military standards. The rescued pilot appeared stable despite obvious hypothermia and possible shock symptoms that required careful monitoring during the next 24 hours. Cypher, her call sign seemed oddly appropriate for someone whose background remained partially classified, responded well to rewarming procedures while maintaining alertness that suggested no serious head trauma from the water impact. Major, I need to ask about any medications you're currently taking and whether you have allergies to specific pharmaceutical compounds, Dr. Morrow explained while reviewing preliminary blood work that would guide treatment decisions. Some nations use different drug protocols that could interact badly with our standard therapeutic procedures. Cypher provided comprehensive medical history that demonstrated thorough preparation for potential capture or medical emergency during combat deployments. Coalition forces maintained detailed medical records for all personnel operating in hostile environments, ensuring appropriate treatment regardless of which Allied medical facility provided care during emergencies. No current medications except standard antimalarial prophylaxis. No known drug allergies. I've been medically cleared for all NATO standard pharmaceutical protocols. Her response indicated extensive medical screening that prepared coalition aircrew for treatment by any Allied medical facility during multinational operations. The blood analysis confirmed mild hypothermia and dehydration, but revealed no indication of internal bleeding or organ damage that might have resulted from the violent water impact. Her survival equipment had performed within specifications, protecting her from injuries that could have proved fatal even after successful ejection from the damaged aircraft. Dr. Morrow had served as flight surgeon for French Air Force squadrons before transferring to naval service, providing her with detailed understanding of aviation medicine and the physical stresses that combat flying imposed on aircrew. Cypher's condition suggested excellent physical conditioning and proper execution of emergency procedures that had maximized her survival probability. Major, you're going to be fine. We'll keep you under observation for 24 hours to monitor for delayed hypothermic complications, but your vital signs are stable and improving. You should make a complete recovery. The prognosis brought visible relief that Cypher attempted to conceal behind professional composure, though her emotional response was entirely understandable given the trauma she'd experienced during the past several hours. Military personnel were trained to suppress fear and vulnerability, but near-death experiences challenged even the most disciplined psychological defenses. "Doctor, when will I be able to contact my unit and report my status? They're probably wondering whether I survived the shoot-down." Her concern for squadron mates demonstrated loyalty that characterized professional military units, where individual welfare remained secondary to unit cohesion and mission accomplishment. Combat aviation squadrons developed family-like bonds that made personnel losses devastating for surviving members who trained and deployed together for years. "We'll arrange communication with your chain of command as soon as we reach port. The French Navy will coordinate with coalition forces to ensure proper notification and repatriation procedures." Dr. Morrow understood the importance of rapid status reporting that would end uncertainty for military families and unit personnel who'd been notified of aircraft losses, but not aircrew survival. The frigate Auvergne continued its transit toward Cyprus, where Cypher would be transferred to coalition medical facilities for final evaluation before returning to operational status or medical leave, depending on her recovery progress. The rescue operation had concluded successfully, though its diplomatic implications would require careful handling by foreign ministry officials in Paris and Washington. Above, the Mediterranean night sky showed no trace of the drama that had unfolded over its dark waters, returning to ancient patterns of stars and planets that had witnessed countless human struggles throughout recorded history. Military aviation added modern chapters to eternal stories of courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood that defined humanity's finest qualities when tested by extreme circumstances. 3 days later, Major Lydia Cypher Korzenko stood in the briefing room at RAF Akrotiri, facing intelligence officers who needed detailed information about Syrian air defense capabilities that had nearly killed her during what should have been routine strike mission against Islamic State chemical weapons facilities. Her survival had provided unexpected opportunity for tactical intelligence that could protect other coalition aircrew from similar threats. The debrief proceeded methodically through every aspect of her mission, from initial target acquisition to final water impact that had concluded with rescue by French naval forces. Her memory remained clear despite trauma and hypothermia, providing precise details about surface-to-air missile engagement sequences that revealed sophisticated coordination between different Syrian air defense systems. "Major, your description of the SA-11 engagement suggests advanced electronic warfare support that allowed ground controllers to track your formation through standard electronic countermeasures," observed Colonel James Mitchell, the intelligence officer leading her debrief. "Did you observe any unusual radar signatures or communication patterns that might indicate Russian technical assistance?" Cypher had anticipated questions about Russian involvement in Syrian air defense operations, knowing her observations could influence coalition planning for future strike missions. The political implications extended beyond immediate tactical concerns, potentially affecting diplomatic relationships between NATO countries and Russia throughout the broader Middle East region. The engagement timeline was too compressed for detailed electronic intelligence gathering, but the missile guidance appeared more sophisticated than typical Syrian capabilities. The tracking remained locked through evasive maneuvers that should have broken conventional fire control systems. Her assessment confirmed intelligence estimates about Russian technical support for Syrian forces, though definitive proof would require electronic warfare analysis of data recorded by other coalition aircraft operating in the same airspace. Her survival provided human intelligence that complemented technical collection methods used by specialized reconnaissance platforms. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering every detail that might prove tactically relevant for protecting other coalition aircrew from similar threats. Cypher's professional competence impressed the intelligence officers with its thoroughness despite personal trauma that would have compromised many personnel's ability to provide accurate information under such circumstances. Major, your survival and rescue represents significant intelligence victory beyond the tactical information you've provided, Colonel Mitchell concluded. Your capture by Syrian forces could have compromised ongoing operations and provided propaganda victory for our enemies. The French rescue operation deserves recognition for its strategic as well as humanitarian value. The comment reminded her of debts that extended beyond personal gratitude to the Rafale pilots, who'd maintained protective overwatch during her most vulnerable moments. Military brotherhood transcended national boundaries when aircrew faced mortal dangers that made political differences irrelevant compared to immediate survival requirements. Sir, I'd like to arrange proper thanks to the French naval and air personnel who saved my life. Their professionalism under difficult circumstances represents the best traditions of military aviation cooperation between allied nations. Colonel Mitchell nodded approval, understanding that international military relationships required personal as well as institutional recognition of shared risks and mutual support during crisis situations. We'll coordinate with French authorities to arrange appropriate recognition for their rescue operation. Your survival story will probably become teaching case study for combat search and rescue procedures. The intelligence debrief concluded with administrative details about her return to operational status, medical clearance requirements, and temporary duty assignments, while her original squadron received replacement aircraft to restore full combat capability. Coalition air operations continued despite aircraft losses, requiring constant rotation of personnel and equipment to maintain operational tempo against Islamic State targets. Cypher would return to flying duties within 2 weeks, pending final medical evaluation and psychological assessment that ensured her trauma hadn't compromised her ability to execute combat missions with competence that protected herself and squadron mates. Military aviation demanded mental as well as physical resilience that few civilian occupations required. Walking across the Cyprus tarmac toward transport aircraft that would return her to operational base, she reflected on lessons learned during her brief but intense encounter with Mediterranean waters and the French aviators who'd refused to abandon a fellow pilot regardless of nationality or political complications their rescue might create for diplomatic relationships between allied nations. The sky stretched endlessly above, indifferent to human concerns but somehow more welcoming now that she'd been granted unexpected second chance to continue challenging gravity through mechanical flight. Her grandfather's wisdom about the sea occasionally rewarding courage with mercy applied equally to aviation, where preparation and training sometimes overcame odds that should have proved fatal to less fortunate personnel. 2 weeks later, Cypher returned to operational flying status with her original squadron, now based at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey following rotation from their previous deployment location. The familiar routine of combat missions against Islamic State targets provided psychological anchoring that helped process trauma through productive activity, rather than dwelling on circumstances that had nearly ended her military career permanently. Her shootdown had become legendary within coalition air forces, not for the surface-to-air missile engagement that had nearly killed her, but for the international rescue operation that demonstrated Allied cooperation under pressure. The story had been sanitized of classified details, but retained emotional impact that reinforced bonds between multinational air units operating throughout the Middle East. Squadron Commander Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos had incorporated Cypher's experience into briefings about survival procedures and international cooperation protocols that might prove vital for other aircrew facing similar emergencies in hostile territory. The rescue operation provided real-world validation of training procedures that, too, often remained theoretical until tested by genuine crisis situations. Cypher, your survival story has become required reading for combat search and rescue training throughout NATO air forces, Santos explained during their first post-incident briefing. The French Navy wants to present you with their Rescue Service Medal during an official ceremony next month. Are you willing to participate in recognition events that might have diplomatic importance beyond personal acknowledgement? The question touched on political dimensions that transcended individual recognition, potentially affecting relationships between coalition partners whose cooperation remained essential for successful prosecution of ongoing military operations against terrorist organizations throughout Iraq and Syria. International ceremonies created opportunities for reinforcing alliance solidarity that supported broader strategic objectives. Yes, ma'am. I owe those French aviators my life. If my participation in recognition events strengthens Allied cooperation, I'm honored to represent our squadron and coalition air forces. Cypher understood that military personnel sometimes became symbols representing larger institutional values that extended beyond individual achievements or recognition. Her response reflected maturity that had been deepened by near-death experience and subsequent reflection on relationships that connected military personnel across national boundaries through shared professional hazards. Combat aviation created brotherhood that transcended temporary political differences between democratic nations, committed to defending common values against authoritarian threats. Santos nodded approval, recognizing Cypher's understanding of broader responsibilities that accompanied survival of circumstances that had claimed other aircrew throughout the long war against Islamic State terrorism. The ceremony will be held in Marseille next month, with representatives from French Air Force and Navy commands, plus NATO leadership. Your presence will symbolize international cooperation that makes coalition air operations possible. The assignment carried significance that extended beyond personal recognition to encompass diplomatic relationships that enabled multinational military cooperation in regions where individual nations lacked sufficient resources to accomplish strategic objectives independently. Modern warfare required alliance structures that pooled capabilities while respecting national sovereignty and command relationships. Cypher's story had already influenced tactics, training, and equipment procurement decisions throughout NATO air forces seeking to improve aircrew survival rates during combat operations in hostile environments. Her detailed debrief had provided insights about Syrian air defense capabilities that protected subsequent coalition strike missions from similar threats. But beyond tactical intelligence, her survival represented triumph of preparation, training, and international military cooperation that reinforced alliance solidarity during period of increasing global instability. The rescue operation demonstrated that allied nations would risk their own personnel to save fellow aviators regardless of nationality or potential diplomatic complications. As she prepared for return to combat operations, Cypher carried knowledge that extended beyond technical flying skills to encompass understanding of human relationships that made democratic military cooperation possible in world where authoritarian forces challenged international law and human dignity through systematic violence against civilian populations. Her grandfather's lessons about courage and mercy had proved prophetic in ways he probably never anticipated when teaching young Lydia about naval tradition and military honor during her childhood visits to Sevastopol. The Mediterranean had indeed rewarded her preparation with mercy, but only after she demonstrated courage that honored his memory and family military tradition. The medal ceremony in Marseille drew representatives from throughout NATO command structure, acknowledging rescue operation that had demonstrated alliance values under pressure while providing tactical intelligence that protected other coalition aircrew from similar threats. Cypher stood at attention as French naval officers presented recognition that honored international military cooperation transcending political boundaries. Admiral Philippe Delacroix, commanding French naval forces in the Mediterranean, spoke to assembled military personnel about rescue operations that exemplified alliance solidarity during combat operations against terrorist organizations, threatening regional stability and international security. His remarks emphasized human dimensions of military cooperation that created bonds stronger than formal treaty obligations. Major Korzhenko's survival represents triumph of preparation, courage, and allied cooperation that defines NATO values in practice rather than merely principle. The French aircrew who maintained protective overwatch and naval personnel who executed rescue operations demonstrated commitment to shared military brotherhood that makes democratic alliance possible. The admiral's words carried weight that extended beyond ceremonial recognition to encompass strategic relationships enabling coalition air operations throughout the Middle East. Military cooperation required trust developed through shared risks and mutual support during crisis situations that tested alliance solidarity under extreme pressure. Cypher accepted the medal with humility that acknowledged her debt to personnel who'd risked their own safety to ensure her survival. The recognition ceremony honored not just individual heroism, but institutional values that distinguished democratic military forces from authoritarian alternatives that treated personnel as expendable resources, rather than valuable human beings deserving protection and support. "Admiral, this medal belongs to everyone who participated in my rescue," she responded when invited to address the assembled personnel. Squadron Leader Ghost and his Rafale formation, Captain Blanchard who maintained communication throughout my ordeal, the helicopter crew who pulled me from the water, and the medical personnel who ensured my recovery. Their professionalism saved my life and demonstrated the best traditions of Allied military cooperation. Her remarks acknowledged collective effort that had transformed potential tragedy into triumph of international solidarity, recognizing that individual survival depended on institutional support structures that connected military personnel across cultural and linguistic boundaries through shared professional values and mutual commitment to democratic principles. The ceremony concluded with formation flyover by French Rafales and coalition aircraft representing multinational character of ongoing military operations against terrorist organizations throughout Iraq and Syria. The display honored not just Cypher's survival but broader alliance cooperation that made democratic victory possible against authoritarian forces threatening international stability. Following the ceremony, she met privately with Squadron Leader Ghost and other French personnel who'd participated in her rescue. The conversation revealed genuine friendships that had developed through shared crisis experience, demonstrating how extreme circumstances could create bonds that transcended normal professional relationships between Allied military personnel. "Major, your courage during that water landing impressed everyone who witnessed it," Ghost observed. "But what really mattered was your preparation and training that maximized survival probability. You honored your profession and demonstrated why NATO air forces invest so heavily in aircrew education and equipment." His assessment reflected professional respect that acknowledged her competence while recognizing institutional factors that had enabled her survival. Military aviation required individual skill and courage, but success ultimately depended on organizational support that provided training, equipment, and rescue capabilities, protecting aircrew during combat operations. The recognition ceremony marked transition from survival story to inspiration for future generations of military aviators who would face similar challenges while defending democratic values against authoritarian threats throughout an increasingly dangerous world. Cypher's experience became teaching case study that would influence training and tactics for decades to come. Returning to operational duties following the Marseille ceremony, Cypher discovered her experience had elevated her status within coalition air forces from competent pilot to recognized expert on survival procedures and international cooperation protocols. Squadron commanders throughout NATO sought her insights about training requirements and equipment specifications that could improve aircrew survival rates. Her tactical knowledge about Syrian air defense capabilities had influenced mission planning procedures that reduced coalition aircraft losses during subsequent strike operations against Islamic State targets. Intelligence analysts credited her debrief with saving multiple aircrew lives through improved understanding of threats that had previously been theoretical rather than documented through actual combat experience. Cypher, Air Force Headquarters wants you to develop survival training curriculum based on your Mediterranean experience, announced Lieutenant Colonel Santos during their weekly squadron briefing. The program would be implemented throughout NATO air forces as standard preparation for combat operations in contested environments. The assignment represented recognition of expertise gained through circumstances she would never have chosen voluntarily, transforming personal trauma into institutional knowledge that could protect other military personnel facing similar dangers. Her survival story provided foundation for training programs that would influence aircrew preparation for decades to come. Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored to contribute to improved survival training for coalition aircrew. My experience demonstrated both individual preparation requirements and importance of international rescue cooperation that saved my life when standard procedures weren't sufficient. Her response acknowledged dual nature of survival that depended on personal competence and institutional support systems extending across national boundaries. Modern combat aviation required individual excellence and alliance cooperation that pooled resources while respecting sovereignty and command relationships among democratic partners. The training curriculum development would require temporary assignment to NATO Training Command, collaborating with survival specialists from throughout the alliance to create programs that incorporated lessons learned from recent combat operations in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and other regions, where aircrew faced threats from sophisticated air defense systems. Her grandfather would have been proud to know his lessons about courage and preparation had influenced international military training that would protect future generations of aviators defending democratic values against authoritarian threats. The Mediterranean rescue that had saved her life would continue saving others through institutional knowledge that honored shared sacrifices of military personnel serving throughout NATO alliance. Combat aviation remained dangerous despite technological advances and improved training procedures, but her experience demonstrated that preparation, courage, and international cooperation could overcome circumstances that might otherwise prove fatal to less fortunate personnel. The sky continued calling to those brave enough to challenge gravity in service of principles worth defending. Her story became legend not because of individual heroism, but because it exemplified alliance values that distinguished democratic military forces from authoritarian alternatives. The French aviators who'd refused to abandon her represented institutional commitment to human dignity that made NATO cooperation possible despite temporary political differences between member nations. As she prepared new curriculum that would influence aircrew training throughout the alliance, Cypher reflected on the strange trajectory that had transformed routine combat mission into inspiration for international military cooperation. Her near-death experience had become foundation for programs that would protect countless future aviators defending democratic civilization against forces that threatened human dignity and international law. The curriculum development assignment brought her to NATO training facilities in Norfolk, Virginia, where survival specialists from throughout the alliance collaborated on programs that incorporated lessons learned from recent combat operations worldwide. Her Mediterranean experience provided unique insights about hypothermia survival and international rescue coordination that would benefit aircrew from all member nations. Working alongside instructors from Britain, Canada, Germany, and other NATO countries, she discovered that survival training had evolved significantly since her own initial preparation years earlier. Modern programs emphasized international cooperation protocols that recognized multinational character of contemporary military operations requiring coordination between different national forces. Major, your experience provides perfect case study for teaching aircrew about survival communications and international rescue procedures. Observed Wing Commander Sarah Thompson, the British officer leading curriculum development. The Morse code beacon technique you used could be implemented throughout NATO air forces as standard emergency communication protocol. The observation reminded Cypher that simple techniques learned from her grandfather's naval radio had proved essential for survival when sophisticated communication systems failed under combat stress. Traditional skills remained relevant even in technological environments that sometimes created overdependence on complex equipment vulnerable to battle damage or electronic countermeasures. Her grandfather's lessons about preparation and improvisation had proved prophetic during circumstances he probably never imagined when teaching young Lydia about naval tradition and military honor. The Black Sea Fleet veterans' wisdom about information transmission had influenced international rescue procedures that would protect future generations of Allied aircrew. The training curriculum incorporated technical improvements and procedural innovations that reflected evolving threats and technological capabilities, but emphasized timeless principles of preparation, courage, and international cooperation that had enabled her survival during darkest moments over Mediterranean waters that had nearly claimed another victim. Her story would be taught in NATO training facilities for decades to come, inspiring future aviators while providing practical knowledge about survival procedures and alliance cooperation that could mean difference between life and death during combat operations in hostile environments. The rescue operation had become foundation for institutional knowledge that honored shared values while protecting those who defended them. Testing of the new survival curriculum began with volunteer aircrew from throughout NATO, simulating emergency conditions that challenged both individual competence and international cooperation protocols. Cypher participated as instructor and evaluator, sharing insights gained through actual survival experience that validated theoretical procedures under realistic stress conditions. The first exercise involved British, French, German, and American pilots practicing hypothermia survival and rescue coordination in North Sea waters that approximated Mediterranean conditions she'd experienced. The multinational character of training reflected operational realities where aircrew might require rescue by personnel from any allied nation, depending on geographic proximity and available resources. The key insight from Major Korzhenko's experience is that survival depends equally on individual preparation and institutional cooperation, explained Captain Jean-Luc Morrow, the French instructor leading water survival portions of the curriculum. Her technical competence kept her alive until rescue forces arrived, but international coordination made rescue possible within timeframes that prevented hypothermic death. His analysis emphasized dual nature of modern military survival that required personal excellence and alliance cooperation, transcending national boundaries. Contemporary combat operations involved multinational forces whose effectiveness depended on seamless integration between different military cultures and operational procedures. Cypher watched trainees practice emergency communications using Morse code beacons, remembering her own desperate attempts to contact French Rafale pilots who'd become her salvation during circumstances that should have proved fatal. The training scenarios reproduced psychological stress that revealed which personnel possessed mental resilience required for survival under extreme conditions. Her experience had demonstrated that preparation meant more than equipment and procedures. It required psychological conditioning that enabled rational decision-making when facing probable death. Combat aviation attracted personnel with exceptional courage, but survival situations tested character in ways that revealed true depth of individual and institutional commitment to shared values. The curriculum validation exercises confirmed effectiveness of training programs that incorporated lessons from her Mediterranean rescue, proving that institutional knowledge could be transmitted through structured education that prepared future aircrew for challenges they might never face, but needed to understand thoroughly if circumstances demanded survival skills under hostile conditions. NATO Training Command approved implementation of enhanced survival curriculum throughout Allied air forces, recognizing that investment in aircrew preparation represented strategic necessity that protected valuable human resources while reinforcing alliance solidarity through shared commitment to personnel protection that transcended national boundaries and political differences. 2 years after her rescue, Major Cypher Korzhenko received promotion to lieutenant colonel and assignment as NATO Survival Training Director, acknowledging expertise gained through circumstances that had transformed personal trauma into institutional knowledge benefiting aircrew throughout democratic alliance structure. Her Mediterranean experience had become foundation for programs protecting countless military personnel. The promotion ceremony at NATO headquarters included representatives from French Air Force and Navy commands who'd participated in her rescue, acknowledging ongoing relationships that demonstrated how extreme circumstances could create lasting bonds between Allied military personnel. Squadron Leader Ghost attended as honored guest, their friendship having evolved into professional collaboration on training programs. Lieutenant Colonel Korzhenko's survival story exemplifies alliance values that distinguish NATO from authoritarian military structures, observed General Patricia Hayes, commanding NATO air training operations. Her experience demonstrates that democratic forces invest in personnel protection because we recognize human dignity as foundation for military effectiveness rather than treating aircrew as expendable resources. The general's remarks emphasized philosophical differences that separated democratic and authoritarian approaches to military personnel management, highlighting institutional values that made NATO cooperation possible despite temporary political differences between member nations. Cypher's rescue had become symbol of alliance solidarity under pressure. Her new assignment would involve coordinating survival training throughout NATO air forces while developing advanced programs that incorporated evolving threats and technological capabilities. The position represented institutional recognition that survival expertise had become strategic requirement rather than specialized skill, affecting only aircrew assigned to high-risk missions. During the ceremony, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from childhood dreams in Lviv to international recognition as survival training expert, whose experience influenced military education throughout democratic alliance. Her grandfather's naval wisdom had proved prophetic in ways neither of them could have anticipated during her youth. The Mediterranean waters that had nearly claimed her life had instead provided foundation for career that would protect countless future aviators defending democratic values against authoritarian threats throughout an increasingly dangerous world. Her survival story would continue inspiring generations of aircrew while providing practical knowledge that could mean difference between life and death. As the ceremony concluded with formation flyover, including French Rafales that honored ongoing cooperation between Allied air forces, Cypher understood that her rescue had transcended personal survival to become symbol of international military partnership that made democratic victory possible against forces threatening human dignity and international law. Her story would endure not because of individual heroism, but because it demonstrated alliance values that connected military personnel across cultural boundaries through shared commitment to protecting those who defended civilization's finest principles. The sky that had nearly claimed her life had instead elevated her mission to heights her grandfather could only have imagined during his service in different era, but same noble cause. The French aviators who'd refused to abandon her had embodied institutional commitment to human dignity that distinguished democratic military forces from alternatives that treated personnel as expendable assets rather than valuable human beings deserving protection and support. Their example would influence training and tactics for decades to come, ensuring her rescue continued saving lives long after Mediterranean waters had surrendered their intended victim to alliance solidarity and military brotherhood.